Hey, Elder. Okay. All right. Well, good evening to all of you here in the house and to all of you Facebook land, if you will. Welcome again to Keeping It Real, Relevant, and Raw here at Coit Community Church. I'm your host, Pastor Adriel Saville Morgan. It's a pleasure, as always, to be worshiping with you on this evening. In a minute, we are going to take a look at a complex, I won't say it's difficult, but a complex text, a complex set of texts that is turned in by one of our seasoned saints, Brother Dick Bruni, and we'll engage that text here after we complete our prayer for understanding. I also continue to ask you to pray with and for the burdens, as they're still, Pastor is coming around, but he's not out of it yet. So we want to keep them lifted in our prayers. So we will pray for over this lesson. Yahweh God, thank you for presenting us with your word, your instructions, and with a way to understand your instructions. We acknowledge that the Bible is right and somebody is wrong. We should read the Bible and read it well because you have a story to tell. And as we go in to tell that story now, be with us, be with our hearts and minds, that we be on one accord, and that there be no divisions among us. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, Yahweh, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. So the question for this evening, again coming from Brother Dick Bruni, starts this way. We know that vows and oaths are not to be made flippantly. From passages such as Deuteronomy 23:21 through 23, and Ecclesiastes 5:2 through 6, we can see that God takes vows very seriously, as should we. One of Israel's pre-king judges, Jepthah, made a rash vow, which is recorded in Judges 11 chapter 29th through 39th verses. I think we can all agree that when he made the vow, no matter how well-intentioned he may have been, he didn't think it all the way through. My question is this, or this is the question. Was Jepthah right to keep his vow and burn his daughter as a sacrifice? That's a spoiler alert if you haven't read it yet. Or should he have broken his vow and allowed his daughter to live? All right. So we can engage this in a couple different ways. First and foremost, it's important, I believe, that we take a look at the scriptures that have been referenced. So first, let's go to Deuteronomy, the 20th chapter. Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter, the 21st through 23rd verses are where we're going to find this reference. Understand, of course, that Deuteronomy, which in Hebrew is known as Hadevarim, the words, and so we will just be looking at the words per se. It comes known as the second law when you get to the Greek Bible, but it's actually not necessarily the second law. And what we'll see is that the Decalogue has already been rehashed, if you will, earlier in Deuteronomy, around the Shema, in the 6th chapter. Everything following that then is a exegesis, if you will, an explanation of those 10 words as they have been laid out. So these, the subtitle on my Bible here says miscellaneous laws, have to do with what has already been mentioned in the Decalogue. And I will tell you which one it is when we get done reading it. So this is, again, Deuteronomy 23rd chapter. Starting at the 21st verse says, if you make a vow to Yahweh your God, do not be slow to pay it. For Yahweh your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty. Whatever your lips utter, you must be sure to do, because you made your vow freely to Yahweh your God with your own mouth. Now, this is separated into its own paragraph, but again, like I said, it can't be separated into its own narrative. This has to be a part of the same narrative that we start to see in 15, if not a little bit before then. But in verse 15, we see information about if a slave has taken refuge with you, do not hand them over to their master. Let them live among you wherever they like, and in whatever town they choose, do not oppress them. 17, no Israelite man or woman is to become a shrine prostitute. You must not bring the earnings of a female prostitute into the house of Yahweh your God to pay any vow. There's that word. Because Yahweh your God detests them both. Do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a fellow Israelite, so that Yahweh your God may bless you in everything you put your hand to in the land you are entering to possess. Right? So we see this idea. What you're looking at here seems to be relationships between people. When you look at that. 15 through 16 has to do with the slave and their master. 17 has to do with how one's image is presented. Not as a prostitute, but their image. Does that ring a bell? Don't make any graven images. Because that word of the Decalogue is to say this. Again, when you read it in its context, which we need to do that, we need to understand. Go back to Deuteronomy 5 real quick. Back to Deuteronomy 5 and C6. I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, Yahweh your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to thousands of generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name, reputation of Yahweh your God. For Yahweh will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. So we have to see something right here. All of that goes together. Because in 6, he said, I am Yahweh your God, meaning he's presenting his image right there. He's telling you exactly who he is. He does not want his image to be misrepresented. And because he has created man to be his image, you skip a little bit later, not skip, but you keep on reading through there and you see what misrepresentation of his image and his name looks like. And in this particular case, when we look at chapter 23 and we start at 15, what it looks like is what you might say is, I don't know the best way to word this other than removing someone's freedom. Taking away someone's freedom who's already been declared free. The idea of being a prostitute for the sake of appeasing, it says a shrine prostitute for a reason, for the sake of appeasing another god, a fertility god, something of that nature. And he uses the word vow there, as we've already seen is going to be the topic of our discussion. Don't charge the Israelite, again, how we deal with people. There's certain business practices that have to be observed in order for us to truly be demonstrating the proper image of Yahweh God. Because he's already said, I forgive to thousands of generations. So what do you look like holding somebody with interest? Okay? So that's not the brunt of what we're looking at today, but we have to understand, as always, the context in order to get the content. Let's look at Ecclesiastes 5 real quick. Ecclesiastes 5. This is the other place where the word vow is going to be used. Start at verse 1 of Ecclesiastes 5. Guard your steps when you go into the house of God. Go near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools who do not know that they do wrong. Do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart, of course your mind, to utter anything before God. God is in heaven, and you are on earth. So let your words be few. This is not speaking of physical location as much as it is to say Yahweh God is omniscient, is all-knowing. We are not. We are finite beings because we're confined to the earth. A dream comes when there are many cares, and many words mark the speech of a fool. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vow. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin, and do not protest to the temple, messenger. My vow was a mistake. Why should God be angry at you, at what you say, and destroy the work of your hands? Much dreaming are meaningless. Therefore, fear God. So you have to understand a little bit also about vows and ancient Near Eastern deities. Okay, they are quite common, just as covenants were back then. And the purpose of them, they are voluntary agreements. That's important to understand. Voluntary agreements that were conditional and usually accompany some kind of a petition to the deity. And so it is, in fact, this if-then type of a activity. The worshiper would promise to undertake a certain action, usually of a ritual nature, not something that they necessarily haven't done in the past, but it ends up being something that they, I don't want to word this. It's something that they typically have done already. It's something that they're familiar with. It's ritual in nature is what I'm saying. So it's nothing too different than saying, I know we have some friends, and some of us have probably even done it. Yahweh, if you get me out of this, I promise I'll go back to church. Because it's something I'm used to. I've gone to church before. So it's nothing that's out of the ordinary per se. It's something that I'm used to doing. We need to understand that that's the deal. That an oath is sworn in the authority of the God. That if the God's name is on it, then therefore that's what kind of gives it that notary seal, if you will. So even though it's a ritual action, the fact that it is promised and notarized by the deity is what gives it the meat, what gives it the weight of what's going on with it. Oaths were used in legal proceedings, which is probably where we got ours from. If you've ever been to court, you raise your right hand, swear the oath. So it's not too far removed from what we have going on. So the question at hand has to do with, as I said, Judges 11. We can understand the context behind that. Let's go to Judges 11. And understand that Jepthah, if you go back to the beginning of it, you'll see that Jepthah has an interesting upbringing. He's fatherless. So he's the son of a widow. But what's more is that he's the son of a widow who's not a believer. She's not part of the covenant. She's not an Israelite. And so there's a lot of strikes against, and yet he's raised up to be a judge. That's a whole other conversation in and of its at a different time. But we want to look beginning at the 29th verse of Judges 11. Then the Spirit of Yahweh came on Jepthah. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. And Jepthah made a vow to Yahweh. If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be Yahweh's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Then Jepthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and Yahweh gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as the Avel Karamim. Thus Yisrael subdued Ammon. When Jepthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter! You have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to Yahweh that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to Yahweh. Do to me just as you promised. Now that Yahweh has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said, and he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. Okay. So we see the vow that was made, as it was referenced in the question. And so now, this is what we need to do. We need to recall that the exegesis of Deuteronomy 23 had to do with proper image bearing, proper identity of Yahweh, proper physical demonstration of who Yahweh is. That's important for us to keep in mind as we look at here, and the question being, have kept his vow, because there's two options here: to keep the vow, which he did, or to not keep the vow. But if he doesn't keep the vow, is he in violation of Deuteronomy 23 and Ecclesiastes 5? That is a deep question, isn't it? Because it seems like we have conflicting things going on here in the Bible. On the one hand, you have all the instruction that the image of Yahweh God is to be treated as such. Therefore, no death, no execution, no mistreatment. And on the other hand, you've got, but I made a vow, and I promised action that has been notarized by Yahweh God according to what the ancient Near Eastern people do with deities, and I can't very well break that. And I think before I get into this comparison here, to me what this sounds a lot like is you go over to the New Testament in the Gospel of John, and there's a woman who the Pharisees catch in the very act, John is very careful to say, of adultery. And when they catch her in the very act of adultery, they drag her through the street. And we are to see that as a form of disrespect and a violation of the image. Don't miss that. That the image is being profaned at that very moment. They drag her through the street. They bring her to the temple. They throw her down before Jesus, who's there teaching, because it's the Sabbath. He's teaching. And they do this to trick Jesus. They want to put him in a pickle, because the law of Moshe, which you claim to follow, says she should be stoned. If you let her go, then you're not following Moshe like you claim you are. And you are, in fact, here to destroy the law, which is what you said you weren't here to do. But on the other hand, if you stone her, doesn't that make you, doesn't that make you a murderer? Doesn't that make it not the compassionate God that you claim that you are? And you remember what Jesus, you may or may not, those of you at home, see what Jesus does. First thing he does is he's just quiet. We can learn a lot from Jesus about arguments and debates because he's quiet. Then he stoops down. There's a lot of imagery and words very, very carefully chosen. The idea of going down, standing up. If you get a chance, read John 7 and going into 8, and you can see all of this imagery and why these words were chosen on purpose. He stoops down. He writes on the ground. And I don't have the time to get into exactly what he writes. And there's been folks that have said nobody knows what he wrote. That's wrong. If you do your homework, and you look at ancient Near Eastern and actually Hebraic culture and what the priests did, this is not an isolated incident. This is an isolated incident in the life of our Savior, Jesus. But this is not the first time a violator of the law has been paraded through town and thrown at the feet of a prophet or a priest. That's not the first time. And when that would happen, the priest is instructed, according to the Hebraic law, to write down the transgression in the sand. There's a reason it's written into the sand. Sand can be blown away on purpose. There's a reason it's not etched into clay so it can become hardened and remain there. It's written into sand because the next thing then that the priest does is, in fact, blow it away. And in the action of doing that shows that that transgression is forgiven. Yeah, that's good stuff. So that's what he's doing. He's writing down the transgressions. But we come to find out most theologians believe he's not writing down her transgression. He's actually writing down the transgressions of the Pharisees. But yet and still, he blows them away. And that just blows me away. So, all that to get back to this, that again, it's not uncommon to find these pickles, is what I'm trying to get at, where this is still the same Bible, and there is a way to honor the Bible and honor Yahweh God without being in violation of any particular text that goes against, that happens to butt against itself, if that makes sense. So I want to take the time to examine two pericopes, two narratives. Now, we read Judges 11. I'm going to read Genesis 22. We're going to compare and contrast. And I don't like talking in front of large groups of people, so I'm going to have y'all do the comparing and contrasting. And if you see something at home, even though we can't necessarily get to you, please put it into the comments, because we want to know what you're finding as well. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go into the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey, and he took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. And when he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there." Himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Sorry, this tickles me. Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of Yahweh called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know you're God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place Yahweh will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of Yahweh it will be provided. All right. Let's start with our similarities between Judges 11 narrative, Genesis 22 narrative. What do we got? Y'all can shout them out. I'll repeat them on the thing. Yes, sir. Father willing to sacrifice only child whom he loved. Yes, sir. Well, let's do similarities. Okay. So that's a difference. That in one case, one of them is showing obedience to the will of Yahweh God, and the other, let's get that on here. Obedience. Consonants. All right. So I slash that's this is basically it. What you brought up again, it is a difference, but we can go there. The similarities include both texts have a father. Both texts have a willingness to sacrifice, and sacrifice being burnt offering. And this is a ritual. This is not something Abraham has never done before. This is not something Jepthah has never done before. They've taken rams, they've taken a calf, and they've offered a burnt offering before. That's nothing new to them. Their only child, they both have an only child. And what's more, they both have a history, if you will, they both have a sordid family history. And because they both have this sordid family history, we know that they both seek, in no uncertain terms, well, I'm going to say Abraham doesn't seek to make a name for himself, but he does want a child. He is concerned about his name continuing. Jepthah is concerned about his name continuing. And the fact that his daughter, because he doesn't have a son, so according to the ancient Near Eastern, he's going to have, his daughter has to no longer be a virgin. She has to get married. She has to get married so that he can adopt a son, so that he can have an inheritance. When he loses his daughter, he ends. His line ends. It's over. So, but here's the thing, and this is why if you looked a little earlier in Judges 11, what you'll see is that one of the things he says in there, because it's his brothers have basically ostracized him, and then they came back to him a little bit later and said, hey, why don't you lead this battle? And he asked him, he said, if I do, are you going to put me in charge? Jepthah is not a humble person. Jepthah wants notoriety. Jepthah wants power. Jepthah wants his name to continue. It's very important to him. That's bravado. On the one hand, Yahweh said back in Genesis 12, I will bless you, I will make your name great. Hipthel tense in Hebrew, meaning I will cause you to do this. So we have the transcendent God who's going to cause someone to become great due to their humility. That's the Abraham scenario. On the other hand, Jepthah says, they're going to make me the leader. I'm going to be great by myself. By the way, because I know these are your people, since I'm so great, even though these are your people, if you do that thing that you do so well and deliver your people, I am going to do what I do. I'm going to present you a sacrifice like I always do. But he says, whatever comes out to greet me. I need you to see the language that he uses is language of bravado. There's no humility in whatever. There's no humility in that. And I know that we say, on the one hand, we say, I can make it through anything with the help of Yahweh God. On the other hand, there's a certain humility that has to exist that says, I can't do everything. And I got to realize that. And the minute that I claim that I'm going to do something on my own power, and the reason we know it's on his own power, because Yahweh didn't say, get up, go to this place I'm going to show you, take this stuff with you, and sacrifice your daughter. One of them is obeying the voice of Yahweh. One of them is obeying their own inner Yetzer Hara. And the thing about this bravado that we're seeing is that when folk have bravado, bravado is what leads to the misrepresentation of the image. The bravado of the colonists led them to enslave an entire nation of people. The bravado of the settlers led them to commit genocide in an entire nation of Native Americans. The bravado of a man by the name of Hitler is what caused him to commit the Holocaust. The bravado is what makes the misrepresentation of the image and say you are expendable. And you see, Genesis 22, this humility says, there's obviously when Abraham is going up and Isaac says, where is the ram? And Abraham says, don't worry, Yahweh will provide the lamb. Because Abraham understands that the representation of the image in the proper way is not one that would be sacrificed. Is not, he says, I do not serve a God that would delight in me killing my son. He knows that. That's what faith is. It's a combination of humility and knowledge that leads him to believe Yahweh is not going to let me kill my son. Something is going to happen here. He knows that. And he knows that because he understands what Yahweh seeks and that the representation of his image, he wouldn't want to kill himself. That wouldn't make any sense. Whereas Jepthah fixes his mouth to say anything that comes out of the house. He leaves no room for any exceptions. Gives no room for any exceptions, meaning it can be a person. And Yahweh says, okay, let it be a person then. Not only let it be a person, but let it be your beloved. Let it be the means for you to continue on with your name. And you see, Yahweh will call our bluff. He'll call your bluff on that. When you make those kind of vows, as you said, flippantly, without thinking, he'll call our bluff on that. And he puts him in a situation that he didn't want to be in. He didn't think he wanted to be in. But at the same time, you read enough commentators and they'll say that actually Jepthah probably didn't care. He probably didn't mind being in that situation. Because he does not have a representation. He doesn't have the proper representation representation of what the image of Yahweh looks like.
I don't know the Hebrew of it, but I've looked at that passage in quite a few English translations, and some of them actually say that Jepthah's vow was, I will offer as a burnt offering any person that comes out of the first person that comes out of my mouth. Is that a possible translation that's accurate?
It is. As I said, I've read some commentaries where that is in fact the case, because Jepthah, again, we have to remember, was not raised in the faith. So the idea of sacrificing to deities, like other ancient Near Eastern societies around Israel, would not be foreign to him. He absolutely would do that. And it's this idea that where there's this, again, the bravado, what we're seeing here, you see how he goes all crazy. And this is the, what it reminds me of. And you got to forgive me for this analogy, but if you've ever been to a homegoing service or a funeral of somebody, and you got those people that just act crazy at those funerals, that just, they're crying all over, they're falling out all over the place. And then the question is, did you do all of that? Did you show all that love when they were alive? If you didn't, why are you on the floor right now? You're putting on a show. Why are you putting on a show? Bravado. The bravado, as you have alluded to, is what causes him to say, oh, you brought me down to my knee. You acting. He didn't a bit more, as you have pointed out, didn't a bit more really care that it was his daughter. That's the end of the situation.
That's the end of the situation.
So we're going to get to the answer in and of itself, but you're seeing the difference between the situations is that one of them values human life, understands that Yahweh values human life as his image, another couldn't care less. And which is why, and this is interesting, because you look at that and you say, but Pastor, he's a judge. He's raised up to deliver Israel. Why? Because if he doesn't care at all about human life, he has no problem wiping out the Ammonites. So he serves the purpose. Now, we're not going to sit here and preach and teach that that's, we got to look at the purpose. And the purpose, if we had more time, we could talk about the thing that the dots need to connect themselves in order for the whole. And if the whole picture is Israel possess the land, hold on to the land, the dots need to be connected that it's some folk that's trying to take the land that need to go away by certain means. And we can say what we want to say about that, because Yahweh loves all people. For God so loved the world. We understand that. But the Ammonites had to go. And I believe that there are some people in this world who need to go. That they stand in the way of peace. And this is not me. This is not Adriel saying. There's some folk, I believe, let me reword what I said. I believe that Yahweh is saying it's some folk that need to go. And therefore he acquiesces in them being taken out for the greater good of getting what we need to get accomplished. But we see why Jepthah is raised up. He's raised up because he doesn't care about folk. He doesn't mind going out killing, slaughtering some people. So here comes the question itself. Is he right to uphold that vow? Well, the short answer is no. He's very wrong to uphold that vow. Now, on the one hand, he made a vow. Ecclesiastes says, be quick to repay your vow. Deuteronomy 23, be quick to repay your vow to Yahweh God. But again, let's go back to the Jesus and the one in the very act of adultery. I think what we see there is the proper representation of the image. We see not only forgiveness for the woman who's caught in the very act, But we see forgiveness for the folk who are accusing her. As I've said, he writes down their transgressions. That's representation of the image. Because when you really do your deep diving, what you'll discover is they're in violation, because the law actually says not only should the woman be stoned, but the man who's caught in the act shall also be stoned. So they're in violation because they didn't do the whole thing. My image is mercy. My image is forgiveness. My image is life is valuable to me. My image is life is in the blood, Leviticus 17. And I need that to be understood by everybody who's trying to deny that whole idea. So, when a vow is made to Yahweh God concerning a person, it needs to represent him and that person, the image, correctly. If it does not, there is no violation in not going through with that vow. That blood and life matter more than words. That blood and life matter more than a ritual that I've been used to doing. Which is how come Abraham got it right, Jepthah did not. And we look at this and we all obviously also notice in terms of our differences, there's no vow here. Abraham never makes a vow. So this is not a vow. The situations are similar, and what we ultimately see is the idea that don't make vows. Don't make vows, because, as I said, he will call you on that. And we don't know, which is exactly what was said, I think it was Ecclesiastes that I was reading. He's transcendent. He's omniscient. We're not. He knows what's going to come out of that door. He knows that next action that's going to take place that we promise we're not going to do. He knows when I say I'm never going to do blank again, that as soon as I say I will never, you get me out of this, I promise I'll never go to another party like that again, and I get out of that mess, and the next day all I'm going to get are texts and phone calls inviting me to another party like that. He knows that. I don't. Or I mean, you know, that's something extreme. But even if I said something silly like, go back to, you know, my vice. Yahweh, you get me out of this, I will never eat another Cadbury egg again. Watch Cadbury eggs go on sale tomorrow. And again, he's not inviting me to a character declination. He's inviting me to demonstrate you made a vow. So the question becomes, I think the question becomes this, or the answer becomes this. If the obeying the vow, if repaying the vow is going to elevate words over the image, don't do it. I think that's the bottom line. If the repaying the vow and following through with the vow elevates words over the representation of the image of Yahweh God, we have no business doing it. But it's like I think, you know, that's the one thing, but I think I really made it clear when I said, just don't make the vow. Because again, what you have to understand is that is a very ancient Near Eastern thing. We are in a Western culture, and we now know that the ultimate vow has been made, and we worship him every day in the form of the person, word, and works of Jesus, who is the Christ. He's made enough vows on our behalf. He's honored those vows. with his own body. And he was the proper representation, is the proper representation of Yahweh God, even hanging on a cross. As he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. As he invites someone to say, you will truly be with me in paradise. He is the representation of the mercy, of the covenant loyalty. He repays the vow. We don't need to make them. Yes, ma'am.
Greg is watching online, and he wonders if you consider bravado and pride to be the same thing.
That is a good question, and without going into any word studies, the answer is yes. If I do word study, well, here's the thing. You're not going to find the word bravado in the Bible. You will find the word pride in the Bible. And you will find the word pride. You will also find words similar to did not seek Yahweh, did not trust Yahweh. All of that is equal to bravado. When I elevate myself, once again, elevating myself in my words, that's what I'm saying is bravado. And when we look at a lot of folks, or even the proverb that pride comes before the fall, absolutely. I am prone to fall when I elevate myself over the will and the word and the works of Yahweh God. So we can certainly say that those are equal to each other. I would do, for my benefit, because I'm a nerd and I like words, I will probably go back and do a little bit more research and see what, what word was used for pride and how it's used throughout the Hebrew Bible, and if it corresponds. I believe it does. I think it simply just means being haughty, being puffed up, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13. But I'll double check that and make sure that I get back to you on that. Thank you. Yes. Oh.
This reminds me of a country and western song I heard today by Travis Tritt. And the reason, it was a very well done song, and he's singing it to probably his lover or wife in a very eloquent way, in essence saying, forgive me for all those things I've done, because I love you and I won't do them again. And part of when I listened to that, as you're talking, I thought, yeah, he's elevating his words. I don't suspect he's going to change his heart if his wife then says, okay, I'll give you one more chance. So yeah, I think it was like he's trying to woo her back with his words, but I don't know that he was going to change what he was saying.
Yeah, that's why, again, we have to always guard our minds, be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Absolutely.
So in looking at your passage in Ecclesiastes, it talks in verse 2, do not be quick with your mouth, do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. And then do not let your mouth lead you into sin. So by making the vow, it led him into the sin of murder, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Two things. One, I think we underestimate the importance of our vows. Psalm 15 describes the kind of a guy God wants to hang around with, who he invites into his temple. And one verse says, he keeps his promises even when it hurts. And I think, one of the vows, and I told you before, I avoid them whenever possible. However, we make vows before God and witnesses when we get married. And I think too often those get neglected. And when you hear couples talking about the struggle their marriage is going through, should we divorce or not, they'll talk about all kinds of things, but they'll never mention vows. Well, we made a vow. That just doesn't come up. And I think it should. I think that needs to mean something. The second thing I was going to say was, I believe you brought us to the right conclusion. And a way to show that was, what if, before Jepthah left to fight, he would have said, Yahweh, I vow that if you make me victorious in this battle, when I get home, I will sacrifice my daughter as a burnt offering. Now, I think if he had said that, we could have all reached that conclusion right away that that was wrong. Well, so was what he said.
Absolutely. And to go, I thank you very much for those. And I'll say this as we prepare to close out, that the point that you brought up earlier, that there's some translations that say person, it's actually no, it is the word thing. And that's, again, people are people. We understand that he has zero, he's very, very casual of how he looks at that, and that a person is a thing to him. And that's the whole bottom line. That we would have realized that, but as we read that head on, anything, we can be thinking, okay, sure, any cow, if my dog runs out to greet me, we're not thinking human being because we have the proper representation in mind. To him, every person is a thing. Everything is there at his whim, which is what we need to see. And I think that's a very important distinction that was made, that we all need to make, is to remember that people are people, not things. And I know that can open up a whole can of worms in a certain department. And I don't want to do that right now. But I don't want to do that right now. But there will be a time when, hey, we will indeed have to wrestle with that. I don't look forward to it, but I know that day is coming. So I'm going to have to get my research on and make sure that we do what we need to do. I think, are there any other comments? We have about 2 minutes before we close out for this evening. I thank you all for joining. Those of you in the house, thanks for coming out, braving this spicy weather. But you know what? 6 months ago we were saying, I can't wait for it to be summer. So you Michiganders are never satisfied, and we thank Yahweh God for anything that we can get here in Michigan. We're going to enjoy the warmth because we know the polar vortex is around the corner. Amen. Thank you for joining from Facebook with us this evening. We look forward to seeing you on here at 600 Lafayette Avenue Northeast, Coit Community Church, for another spirit-filled service. Until next time, may Yahweh bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and give you his peace as we go to lift each other in prayer and lift him in praise. Amen.